All right, welcome everyone to today's Google SEO Search Central Office Hours Hangout. My name is John Mueller. I'm a search advocate on the search relations team here at Google in Switzerland. And part of what we do are these office hour hangouts where people can join in and ask their questions around their websites and web search. Bunch of questions were submitted on YouTube, so we can go through some of those. But as always, maybe we can go through some of the live questions here to get started. And let's see, Michael, I think you're on top.
Good morning, John.
Hi.
So we have a site that has a hub and spoke architecture. So a hub page might be Eric Clapton, and the spokes are what guitars he uses. And each of those pages are relatively small. The value from them is from embedded videos or pictures with relatively little unique font content. Over time, those pages have become the majority of our indexed pages with well over 100,000, but only a third of those are getting traffic through search. In the past, I've heard you say that to affect your website's quality score, we were considering de-indexing those pages, but the pages that are not getting traffic, that is. However, we were also considering canonicalizing these. So I was curious how Google would treat that from a quality score perspective.
So we don't really have a quality score in that sense. I think that's something that comes from the ad side. So that's kind of one thing to kind of keep in mind there. Let's see. I think there are multiple things to think about here. On the one hand, I would consider taking some action if you feel that these pages are low quality. And taking action could be something like removing those pages, improving those pages, combining those kinds of pages together. Anything along those lines could be something that you could do if these are low quality pages. If these are just pages that tend not to get a lot of traffic, but they're actually useful on their own, then I wouldn't necessarily see them as low quality. So that's kind of one thing to keep in mind. On some websites, pages that get low traffic are often kind of almost like correlated with low quality as well, but that doesn't have to be the case. On other websites, it might just be that, well, a lot of traffic goes to the head pages, and the tail pages are just as useful, but they're useful for a much smaller audience, so they get barely any traffic. And from our point of view, those websites are still useful, and it's still high-quality content. I wouldn't remove it just because it doesn't get traffic. With regards to the different kind of approaches there, when I ask the search quality teams about this, usually they say, well, you should just improve the quality of your pages, which kind of makes sense. But at the same time, if you're talking about hundreds of thousands of pages, that's really hard to do at scale. So sometimes people do opt for removing the pages or combining the pages. The thing to keep in mind with using a canonical to combine pages is that we only take into account the canonical page then. So if you have one page, for example, about Eric Clapton's guitars and another page about Eric Clapton's shoes, and you say the guitar page is the canonical for the shoes page, then we wouldn't have that shoe page or any of its content in our index anymore. We would essentially just focus on the guitars. So if someone were searching for Eric Clapton shoes, they wouldn't be able to find those pages at all. So that's kind of, with the different approaches, something to keep in mind. So in a case like that, what I would do is take the content from the page that you want to kind of remove or clean up and include that into kind of a bigger page and make that bigger page stronger. And by that, you're also making sure that you still have that content indexable somewhere.
OK. Thank you, John.
Sure. Let's see, Praveen.
Hi, John.
Hi.
So we have a situation where we need kind of some clarity from Google's perspective on our website. Please don't mind if I feel stupid asking this question, but this is the kind of situation we are in. So we have a site that is creating a lot of user-generated content, and on that site we have a lot of pages that we feel are not relevant to the search users. Like you can consider them as user profile pages, where all those pages are kind of blank pages with just username and a little bit of details. So they don't make sense for the search user. So we want to keep them out of search. So what we did is we added meta robots tag with no index on all such pages. But the number of such URLs is kind of very high, like 5,000, 6,000 URLs. So to kick the process, we just use the removals tool on Search Console and remove all those URLs from search. Now, I was advised that since these URLs are out of search results, why don't we just put block their crawling from robots.txt also, so that Google don't crawl them. But I think here what's the confusion is, what happens when we remove those URLs from search. I mean, they are still part of the search index, if I'm not wrong. And so we want to know if those URLs are removed from search, whether Google still tries to crawl them during those 6 months, or if it's not crawling them, because if it's crawling them, then it won't be able to see no index tag if you block the crawling. And after 6 months, what happens? Whether Google has to recrawl all those URLs to put them in search back, or they just come back on their own without even crawling. So the confusion is around whether we should block the crawling or not.
Okay, so the removal tool in Search Console basically just hides the page in the search results. It doesn't change anything with the indexing or with the crawling of the page. So during the time that the removal is active, essentially we will recrawl and re-index that page normally. So if you added a no-index meta tag to those pages, then we would notice that, usually within that half-year time. And then we will drop the page from the index naturally. So that's something where we explicitly also time the removal tool in a way to make sure that in the majority of the cases, we can recrawl the page. And if it has a no index tag in the meantime, or is 404 or whatever, then we would drop it from the index completely as well. So it's kind of like a smooth transition to the removal tool expiring and the page actually being gone as well. If you block it by robots text, for many cases, we would drop the page from the index as well. And in the cases where we don't drop it, it's usually a matter of we might keep the URL index, but we wouldn't have any of the content index. So that means that if someone is searching for a piece of content which is across the rest of your website somewhere, and we also know this roboted page has that piece of content, then we would probably just show the rest of your website. Whereas if someone is explicitly looking for that exact URL, then we would still show that URL in the search results. So in practice, if you're talking about a bigger website that has a lot of different kinds of content, probably we would just have something else to show. And a robots text disallow would be very similar to kind of a no index on a page as well. It's a little bit different if you're disallowing an important page on your website and you don't have any equivalent content. So for example, if you disallow the crawling of your home page and someone searches for your website by name, then your home page is still the most important page that we would show. So we would show that even if it's roboted. Whereas if it had a no index on it, we wouldn't show it. So those are kind of the subtle differences there. My feeling is, in your case, it doesn't matter either way. I would personally try to use a no index rather than a robots text, especially if you're talking about a relatively small number of pages, like a couple thousand pages, because that's something that can be picked up with normal crawling, and we can just process that on a per-page basis. Everything in the robots text file is sometimes really hard to diagnose and debug what it might be causing. So because of that, I would try to put it more into the page level and the robots meta tags.
OK, thank you. Just a follow-up question on this one, which is very similar to this one. For example, there are a few pages that we remove through removals tool. We are not using any no index meta tag on that. During those 6 months, does Google still use those URLs for quality assessment of the website? Will it consider even those pages?
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, those pages would still be indexed if they don't have a no index or any kind of blocked. We just don't show them in the search results. So that's something where we would still take that into account. Usually, if you're talking about individual pages, then that's not going to skew your overall kind of assessment of the quality of your website. If you're talking about a significant part of your website, then that's something where it could kind of affect kind of the understanding of the overall quality of your website.
Yeah, just wanted to understand basically whether they are considered or not. So they are considered. Just
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. OK, Julian.
Hey, John. My question is about the value of backlinks pointing to a page that is no indexed. Kind of like Praveen was just talking about user profiles. So in my case, when a user signs up for my site, they get a user profile page, and that page can be useful for a user, so that they end up linking to it from around the web in some cases. In regards to my website, these profiles are pretty thin, and there are hundreds of thousands of them, so I end up no indexing all of them. But by doing that, am I losing the value of backlinks that are pointing to those pages and to the site as a whole?
Maybe. It's a bit tricky because kind of from the way that the indexing systems work on a technical level. When it comes to links, we have to kind of understand the link between two canonical pages. So that's kind of that one external page where it's linking from, the canonical that's for that, and the internal page that's canonical on your website. And when it comes to no index pages, there are some situations where we kind of keep them in our index when we freshly process them. And we just don't, we kind of understand there's a no index on it, so we don't use them actually for anything. But we can still process them. However, for the most part, when we recognize that a no index is kind of a persistent state on a page, then we will just say, well, we don't have to do anything with this page. We will ignore it completely. We don't need to keep it in our index. And in those cases, essentially those links pointing to the no index page, they go nowhere. And then we drop them. So that's something where if it's critical to your website that you use kind of these no index pages to forward signals or PageRank or what have you within your website, then I would see if there's a way to make them indexable instead, just to make sure that you don't have this ambiguity of, well, maybe Google picks it up, maybe Google doesn't pick it up. And that's, I don't know, that's something I may take into account there. The one thing I have seen with a lot of profile pages is they tend to get spammed a lot, because people also like to use them to drop their links, or they drop things like titles or names and URLs in there, all of that. So that's something where I can see how it makes sense to no index them. But maybe there's a way to figure out like how you can selectively do that, how you can recognize the high-quality profiles, keep those indexed, and the lower-quality profiles kind of make sure that they're no indexed.
OK, so it's correct to think of them as pages that will have their quality judged, kind of just like any other page. Is that right?
I mean, if they're no index, we wouldn't be taking them into account when understanding the quality of the page. But it's kind of uncertain whether the links would forward from there to the rest of your website.
Yeah. OK. OK. Cool. Thank you.
Sure. OK, Francis.
Hi, John. Morning.
Hi.
I have 4 questions for you. So before I go ahead, I'll just brief you on the history of the website. Yeah. So we are a tech repair service company. We fix iPhones, iPads, Apple products. So our website, WordPress website, we launched it back in 2011, okay, with a single-page website. Then we completely revamped in 2012 with about 150 pages. Then again in 2014 with 500 pages. This was a major upgrade. And it has been growing steadily. So then in 2016, we again refreshed the content with new pages. And the growth has been very good, decent growth since February 2018. Now, I observed after February 2018 that there was a gradual decline in organic traffic. So in June 2019, we decided to revamp the whole website again. And I used, the same website agency who helped me to, create new pages and refresh the content in 2016. So now, majority of the, responsibility was given to this outsourced website agency. All right. Now, they didn't ever work, keeping SEO in mind. So what they did is they we deleted all the pages, old pages, and created new pages and new internal links. So this is a bad sign, yeah. So and without redirecting the old ones. So I discovered this problem. So I fixed this within a week, but I couldn't put the old URLs back. So instead, I redirected the old URLs, to the new ones. And I finished the contract with the SEO agency, and I started working on the website on my own and started learning SEO. Now, just in middle of this December 2020 core update, I discovered a major technical problem with the website. So Search Console was reporting close to 4,000 URLs, which were indexed but were not submitted. So when I looked into those pages, okay, they were all images. So basically, it was thin content, just one image with a header and footer, okay. And in fact, I have only close to 450 pages at that time, good quality pages. So I realized, okay, this is a big issue. So I fixed this problem. It was an SEO plugin which I was using with my WordPress site, and there was a bug which was reported back in 2018. It was called a media attachment bug. So what it happened was when they updated the plugin, it enabled that option in the plugin, which creates unique links for every single image on the website, like icons, images, everything. So I had close to 4,000 images. So I fixed this problem, and I used a removal tool in Search Console to remove all the index pages from the search, right? And after that, I've been, working hard on the website, creating new content. So new content has been there, new pages, plus, according to customers' point of view, user-friendly, and I've drastically improved the page speed as well. Now, my first question, does this 6 months or more timeline applies in my case? How long do you think it will take for Google to reevaluate the whole website in my case, that there have been no more thin content pages on the website? And I have seen a gradual increase in the impression in Search Console since June 3rd, which was the last core update, but nothing significant so far.
I think you also posted this in the comments. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I took a quick look at the website beforehand. So I think, first of all, those kind of media pages would not be seen as a problem from our side. So that's not something where I would say that would have triggered any severe issues on your website. So kind of just as an aside, I think cleaning up these kind of pages makes sense, but it's more a matter of kind of like making sure that you have a clean and strong website, and less a matter of those pages causing any problems. Because sometimes we just index a lot of pages that end up not being that valuable, but it doesn't drag down the overall quality of the site, because those pages tend not to be shown in search anyway. So from that point of view, I wouldn't worry about those old things. I also took a quick look at your site in our internal tools just to double check some things, and it doesn't look like we consider your site to be low quality or problematic or anything like that. So with that kind of in mind, my kind of initial assumption that this change since 2018 is more of kind of like a natural change over time, I think was kind of confirmed. And I would see this as something where it's like, well, the web has evolved. Some user needs might have changed over time. And with that, it's important that you kind of keep updating your website, keep working on your website, keep improving the website to make sure that you kind of remain relevant. Because if you don't do anything on a website over time, then it just becomes less and less relevant. It's not that your website becomes worse. It's just it's not as relevant as it might have been in the past. So my kind of recommendation there would be to say, well, let all of those old things kind of leave them by the side. Don't worry about them. And instead, focus on your website as it is now, and focus kind of on the future, and keep working to improve things there.
Right. And even I'm writing new blogs about new topics related to this industry. So I hope that helps. Now, but second question, which I'm confused about, this is about duplicate content on the website. So I have individual pages, all right, for each model and their faults. For example, we fix, iPhone 6 screen and also iPhone 7. So the content for iPhone 6 and 7 is almost like the same, except for that the name is different, heading is different, the image I used is different, the prices are different. All right. So does this kind of content be considered as duplicate content?
I don't think we would see it as being kind of like purely duplicate content, but what is probably happening is you're competing with yourself, and you're going into a situation where someone is searching for maybe iPhone screen repair or something like that. And instead of having one really strong page on this topic, you have multiple pages on that topic. And that means all of those multiple pages have to rank on their own, which means if the competition is very strong for some of those queries, then your pages will have a hard time. Whereas if you have one really strong page on this topic where you say, well, it's like, this is for these 5 models of iPhones. And along the way in the page, you say, well, for this iPhone model, it looks like this. For the other iPhone model, it looks like that. Then you kind of have those different variations covered. But you have one strong page rather than multiple pages that are kind of medium strong. So that's usually the direction where I would head and say, well, try to combine the content into kind of stronger pieces so that you can compete better in that area, especially if this is an area where the competition is very strong. If it's something where you're by far the only website that is talking about this, then maybe it makes sense to have multiple pages on the topic. But if there's a strong competition, then it's really important that you have a strong page to kind of compete in there.
I understand. I have a strong page. So, for example, I have a page for iPhone screen replacement, and I have described about the services. And I've also mentioned screen replacement services for each particular model on that page itself. So let's suppose if customer wants to look into a particular problem for its particular device. For example, if customer has iPhone X, so customer will go to that particular model, look for his problem, and he can dive deeper into what is causing this problem, how much it will cost, how much it will charge, things like that. So that is why I have this exhaustive a description of each problem.
Yeah.
All right. So I have a third question. So is it OK to place a schema markup of Google My Business reviews on the footer of my site? Because I'm using a plugin, which I can use this as a widget, okay, and I can place it on the footer for Google My Business reviews. Is there a problem with this implementation? Will Google think it's a duplicate content, because the schema is on all the pages?
It's not so much that it's duplicate content. It's more that the reviews are not collected directly on your website, and that would be against the review policies. So that's kind of the angle I would watch out for there. So with the structured data types and the rich results that we show in search, I would double check the policies that we have in our documentation and really make sure that any plugin that you use, it kind of complies with the policies.
I understand. All right. So now the fourth question and the last question. So my average response time on my website, when I see in Google Search Console, it's around about 800 milliseconds. Yeah. So I want to understand where Googlebot crawls from, because my server, it is hosted in Bahrain, in Middle East, and my users are in UAE, which is very close. And I have, when I check the server response time with the tool, it shows only 20 milliseconds. So I want to understand what could be the cause of this slow response time. Could it be that the bot is crawling from faraway location?
Probably. So we crawl for the most part from the US. And that's probably where I would assume we're crawling your website from as well. The response time there is purely a matter of kind of like us accessing your server and crawling the data there. It's not what we would take into account for ranking purposes, for kind of the core web vitals, the speed ranking factors. For those factors, we take into account what users actually see. So if users are nearby and they have a really fast experience, that's what we would use for ranking.
I understand. So will it make a difference? So it won't make a difference if you deploy my server in US East Coast, for example.
I think in your case, it wouldn't make any difference at all. So if you had a website that had hundreds of millions of pages and we have trouble crawling because of your server location, then I would move it. But if you're talking about, I don't know, a couple thousand pages, tens, 20, 30, 100,000 pages, I wouldn't worry about that.
I understand. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate it.
OK, cool. I see there's still more hands raised, but let me run through some of the submitted questions just to make sure that we have that side covered as well. Let's see. The first one is one about content silos, which is basically like, does it make sense to kind of create these kind of content silos on with like focused internal linking on specific topics and things like that. So from my point of view, I would not see this primarily as an SEO move, but more as something that you might do for users, in the sense of if it's clear for users that like your site is really strong on a specific topic, that makes it a lot easier for them to understand the context of the individual things that you have there. And kind of indirectly, we understand things a little bit better for SEO as well. But it's not something where I would say, it's like, well, those internal links are coming from this theme page and going to that theme page that should match exactly, and then Google will rank our pages better. I wouldn't focus on that level. I would focus really more on kind of creating a strong part of your website or your whole website that is focused on a specific area, because that makes it easier for us to understand what this website is about. It's less about kind of like tweaking internal links and more about actually making it clear what your content is about. In terms of page quality, what is better in Google's eyes? A page that ranks for a single keyword with high traffic, or a page that ranks for lots of keywords but gets little to no traffic? I don't think we would care about this at all when it comes to understanding the quality of a page. It's really almost more a strategical question on your side. So some websites like to focus on kind of very head queries, where you have few keywords going to these pages, but it's like a lot of traffic. Other websites like to focus more on the long tail side of things, where you have kind of longer queries going to those pages and generally less individual traffic per query, but overall it might still be interesting to you. And that's something where you can kind of focus on things the way that you want. And sometimes it makes sense also to think about the competitive environment you're active in. And if there are lots of other sites active and focusing on the head queries already, then it's going to be hard for you to get in there and say, like, well, my page is also really relevant for online bookstore, because there are lots of really strong online bookstores out there already. And maybe it makes sense to focus more on long tail queries first, and to kind of build your website up over time first. But it's not that one or the other is better. It's just a different way of kind of doing things online. Despite having cleared all possible caches, the old version of my website keeps showing in PageSpeed Insights Mobile. Very rarely do I get the right mobile updated version. I just noticed that the PageSpeed Insights is pulling the Google cached version of the site most of the time. So I think, first of all, the PageSpeed Insights tool does not have any connection with the Google cache. So it's not possible for that tool to even pull the data from the Google cache to show that. What my guess is happening here is that for whatever reason, something along the line between your server and our server, where PageSpeed Insights is hosted, is serving a cached version of those pages. And especially if you're saying that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, then that sounds very much like something kind of temporarily is serving a cached version. One thing that I've used in some situations that has helped to kind of like break through this kind of caching where you don't know what's happening is just to add some query parameters to the URL. So instead of just checking your home page, check your home page plus a question mark plus some random number. And in general, servers will ignore kind of everything after the question mark if they don't need it. But the networking systems along the way will recognize this is a unique URL and will try to request the most recent version of that from your server. And by doing that, you kind of circumvent any of the caching that is happening along the way. It doesn't work 100% of the time. Sometimes the caching along the way does something smart and breaks that from happening. But for the most part, that kind of works. And that should be a way to test individual pages. Obviously, you can't check the whole website with random characters attached to the end. But at least for individual pages, when you're checking with a tool like PageSpeed Insights, you can kind of work around that. Then 3 questions. Let's see, localizations. We use separate websites with brandable domain names for each language using hreflang. Is there something like too many localizations for this method, specifically 15 languages? There's nothing like too many localizations, but what happens here is kind of similar to what I mentioned before in that you're creating a lot of different pages. And essentially, you have all of these pages that are kind of maybe perhaps a little bit lower quality. Well, not lower quality, but kind of lower strength overall. And then they also end up competing with each other a little bit. So if you have, for example, going from a situation where you have one really strong website and taking that website and creating 15 different language versions or 15 different country versions of that website, then you kind of have everything diluted almost in a sense. And because of that, it can happen that the individual versions rank a little bit worse than before because we kind of don't understand the strength of the website overall. So usually, there's a kind of a balance that you need to find between having different country or different language versions and having really strong versions of your website to kind of make sure that you're not diluting things too much. So it's sometimes, I mean, it's like technically it's possible just to take any website and say, I will create a version for every country on the world. And usually that's overkill and results in us kind of really having trouble understanding your website at all. And if you have an international website, the other alternative is kind of like to say, I will just have one website. And probably that's not that great because you're not focusing on individual markets. And somewhere in between there is the sweet spot. And that sweet spot depends a lot on your website, on your users. And so it's not something where there's like one clear number that we can say it's like, you should have 3 country versions or 15 country versions, because it really depends on the website. Webmaster Tools, or I guess Search Console. Wow, still using Webmaster Tools. Often shows clickable elements too close for some of our mobile pages. These are HTML5 games, so the HTML elements are close together on purpose. Is there any way to signal that the elements are close on purpose, or maybe exclude the pages from the check? Users love the game, and the usage metrics are great. Will it offset this warning when the algorithm decides about mobile ranking? So there's no way to exclude those pages from the kind of mobile friendliness check. So that's kind of the first thing there. With regards to mobile ranking, I don't know actually how this would work out. Because it's possible that depending on the setup that you have, that we would see these pages as not being mobile friendly anymore. And then it's possible that we would say, well, if they're not mobile friendly and we have other pages on the web that are equivalent, but they are mobile friendly, then maybe on mobile we should be showing those other pages instead. So that's something where I don't have a clear answer for you there. If you have some examples, I'm happy to take a look with the team. If you can send them to me maybe on Twitter, or if you're here, drop them in the chat. I can pick them up as well. Then a question about mobile interstitials. In 2017, interstitials were a big no-no. And even today, monetizing with AdSense vignettes is capped to showing only once per hour. However, for our use case, a game, interstitials are far better solutions than banner ads because banner ads take precious screen space. Interstitial ads is very common in mobile apps. Is there any change to Google's stance on interstitials? Will it affect our rank if we do use interstitial ads on our mobile website? So there's not really a change in our stance when it comes to interstitials, in that intrusive interstitials are still something that we would use as a ranking factor. It's a part of the page experience elements as well. However, this is essentially focused on that moment when a user comes to your website. So if you're using interstitials as something in between the normal flow of when a user goes to your website, then from our point of view, that's less of an issue. But really, if someone comes to your website and the first thing that they see is this big interstitial, and they can't actually find the content that they were essentially promised in search, then from our point of view, that looks bad. But if people can go to your website, they can do something on there, they can start to play a game, and kind of like at the start of the next level, you show an interstitial ad, then from our point of view, that's perfectly fine. That's essentially something between you and the user, and finding that balance of how many ads you show, or how you present those ads during the kind of session on the site, that's essentially something up to you. So from that point of view, probably this is less of an issue to focus on. I don't know your specific website. I don't know how it is when users go to it. But that's something where probably I would guess it's OK. Can I fully delete my site and start a new site after X amount of time and republish my old content without any redirections? If so, how long? I don't know. I'm not quite sure what it is that you're trying to achieve here, because from my point of view, if you're deleting your website and you kind of say, well, I think my website is bad and I want to start a new one, then you wouldn't be republishing the same content. Whereas if you did want to kind of keep some of the content because you think that content is actually good, then I would just delete the bad content and then focus on building up a website with the good content instead. And not kind of do this thing where you delete everything, wait a couple of months, and then hope that Google doesn't realize that actually you're just republishing the same thing as before. So I would kind of shy away from this approach and try to think of it more as building up something of value over time. And if over time you realize that there are some things in there that weren't that great, then just kind of improve those things or remove them and focus on continuously building up the overall value of a website, especially compared to kind of this almost like slash and burn strategies that spammers sometimes use, where they just build up a big website, and if it doesn't work, they tear it down and start over completely again, because it's just so much work, and you lose so much energy on kind of this continuously building up, taking down thing, rather than just focusing on building something really strong and really good and improving that over time. I do a query on Google, and the results are not good. The first result only has one video and thousands of comments. Why does that one site rank? I end up writing quality content on the same topic. Even not only me, other results that are also great are still below that result. I look up the website, and I found there are a lot of authoritative in their niche. But as much as I know, Google's priority is on content and relevancy. And the query was programming. So I think, first of all, a query like programming is so ambiguous that there is no absolute right or wrong when it comes to ranking something there. So that's something where I would assume that the results that you see there are going to be kind of mixed, and it's going to be hard to just say, well, I'm going to create a piece of content on the topic of programming, and Google will rank it #1. So my recommendation here is, especially if you're starting out, don't focus on queries like programming. Instead, focus on something that is really strong, something that you can do really well, and something that doesn't have as much competition or doesn't have as much other content out there already, so that you can kind of build up some experience over time and understand how things work, understand how users actually react to your content, understand which kind of content works well for search, which kind of content works well for users. And over time, kind of like keep building that up. And that can result, in the end, with you focusing on things that are more head terms, so things like that are shorter queries that users search for a lot. But that also gives you a little bit of a foundation to kind of build on, where you kind of know that, well, I get a lot of questions on this specific aspect of programming, and that's why I have a lot of great content on, and that's where I rank really well. And then over time, maybe it makes sense to expand from there into a more broader topic. Or maybe you find other topic areas where it's equally the case that there's actually not a lot of content out there, but there are enough people that are searching for this information that it makes it worth your while to actually create that content and maintain it, keep it running on your website. Let's see. I have a question about branded names and site diversity update. In Turkey, we have a case about this one website. In Turkish, it means directly from the owner, or I guess it's a Turkish word. And we can say that it's a generic keyword in our sector. So our problem when searching for a generic and critical word like this, the search results of our companies is operating in the used car listing and real estate sectors do not appear on Google search results for that page. On the same page, Google argues that users can only get the best service when they can access very different content from a variety of sources. However, this situation is also in contradiction with the fact that showing dozens of results belonging to a single site in queries that are made with this word. I don't know. It sounds like something very specific where I probably need to see some of the example search results pages. But in general, while we do try to show a variety of sources in the search results, it can definitely happen that we show a bunch of results from the same website. So it's not the case that we have a hard limit on the number of results that we show per website, but more a case that we kind of try to focus on a broader variety of sources. But that still kind of means that it's possible that we end up showing multiple results from the same website. And we wouldn't necessarily see that as a bug. But it's also really hard for me to judge this, because on the one hand, I don't know Turkish, and I don't know what the results could be for some of those queries. So it's tricky for me to, I don't know, figure out what the best approach here would be. My recommendation here would be, if you can send me some examples, maybe on Twitter or somewhere else, on what you're exactly seeing here and why you think this is bad, and ideally why like the top results are bad for these kind of queries, then I'd love to take that over to the search quality team and let them take a look to see if there's something that we can tweak in our algorithms. But this isn't something where we would take individual queries and individual websites and kind of like hand-tune them. That just doesn't work at scale. But it is something where sometimes this kind of feedback helps us to improve our algorithms for the long run. We deleted a disavow file because it was made in the wrong way. How long will it take to affect the site results? There is no fixed time for kind of deleting and reprocessing disavow files. In practice, what happens is we pick up the disavow file immediately. And over time, as we recrawl the links that used to be in there, we double-check the disavow file. We recognize, oh, these links are no longer blocked by disavow. And then we take those into account. So my recommendation here would be not to delete the file and just wait until it's clean and then update a new file, but rather to just update the disavow file to what you want to be taken into account for the disavow, and kind of work from there, and kind of see it as something that over time will be taken into account. Cool. OK, we're kind of running into the last 10 minutes, so maybe I'll switch back to questions from you all. I also have a bit more time afterwards, so if we can't get through everything, we can do more of that later on. Let's see, Michael, you're up next.
Good morning. Yeah, 3 questions. One following your disavow one. If somebody had put a disavow file and since then they've passed away and stuff like that, we've taken over the website, but we don't have access to that Search Console account. If we upload a blank or a different disavow file, would this one supersede the previous one?
Yes.
Okay.
But I mean, then you would have to have access to the Search Console, the verified site.
Yeah, so we've got access to that. So we've got access with the new partner who's looking after the business. The previous owner, one of the partners, has passed away, and obviously all of those access we don't have. But we've set up new accounts with new access and stuff like that.
OK. Well, in that case, you should also be able to download the disavow file. And then you can take the old file into account and update that.
What, from our new creation of the Search Console?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Even with a different account, if it's for the same verified site, then you should be able to download the disavow file.
Okay, okay. All right, I'll have a look for that then. Okay, okay. The next question is one Core Vitals. We've got static websites done years ago, and they perform really well. In the Search Console, we've got good URLs all across the board, 152. But on the Lighthouse, it comes up as performance poor. Now, normally, if somebody comes to this website, they're browsing generally about 7 pages. They're looking at limousines, so they're looking at different cars and different events, and then they convert maybe after going through a couple of pages. So it's not the initial page, but obviously when they first land, all the relevant assets, the CSS and any JavaScript and that. So is it telling the customers, look, don't worry about the headline figures on Lighthouse, or just look at your Search Console for 152 good URLs? Or
a bit of both. So so let's see. Essentially, what you're looking at is the different kinds of data that we have around speed, which is the field data, so what users are actually seeing, which is in Search Console, and the lab test, which is what Lighthouse would be showing. And the lab tests try to approximate what users would see. And they're very useful for things like recognizing low-hanging fruit, things that you can improve on your website. Mm-hmm. And they're useful for kind of this iterative debugging and optimization process. But lastly, what we take into account is what users actually see. And if users are seeing good results and Lighthouse is saying, oh, like you could improve something, then you could still improve those things, but users are actually seeing something good. So it's essentially you're already in a good state. And because Lighthouse tries to approximate what users see, sometimes that doesn't match what your actual users see. So in particular, we make certain assumptions with regards to kind of device connections, the capacity of the devices that they're using. And it might be that your users don't match those assumptions. And because of that, maybe they're seeing a really good experience versus what our lab tools say, well, perhaps they might be seeing.
Okay, okay. And the last question is, we're reworking a number plate registration site. So these aren't number plates you make up. These are pretty old number plates. So we've got 500 number plates. So the actual, now we want people to find those. The only problem is each number plate's obviously on their own page and all that kind of stuff. But the only thing different is the number. And you can't write, 1,500 words about a registration plate. So what do I do with them?
I think that's tricky. Yeah. I think on the one hand, it makes it really hard to make interesting pages. And on the other hand, I assume lots of other sites already have similar information. So we see that, for example, with all of the phone number sites, where essentially people write a script and they iterate through all possible numbers, and they just create pages for those. And like on the one hand, there's a lot of competition because those numbers are on different places on the web. On the other hand, there's very little actual content on the individual pages. So you have to kind of find a balance between making something that is actually useful for users there, and making something that, I don't know, has enough value that it can stand on its own. So maybe it would make sense to combine some of these and say, like, I don't know, 500 are number plates or 600 are number plates, something like that. But I suspect if you just create individual pages for every number plate possible, then our systems would kind of struggle with that and not really know what to show where.
So potentially just a page with 500 numbers on there and no index the individual pages.
I don't know. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to achieve with those numbers.
Oh, yeah. So these are like numbers going back since day dot in the UK. They're not made. So these are previously owned. So, for example, A1 on a number plate, they can't be purchased anywhere else. So if you wanted your A1 on your car, the only place to get it from is this particular website. And that's it. So if somebody's going to search for it, that page, that number needs to come up somewhere.
Oh, OK. So these are essentially products that you're offering. Yeah. And the name of the product is essentially just that number plate thing. Now, I don't know. I think that'll be tricky, but it's something where my guess is the website overall will just need to be seen as kind of an authoritative place for these kind of number plates. And my assumption is you'll have a hard time ranking for most of these number plate queries directly. And you would end up ranking more for things like unique number plates or something like that.
Okie dokie. All right, thanks for your time.
Sure. All right, Abs, I think.
Oh, hi, John.
Hi.
It's quite a specific question. We run a e-commerce platform where anybody can come along and create products, stores, have a small blog area, and so on. And all of this is under our domain. So think Shopify, but all their stores under one domain. And we've got about 100K pages indexed. And we think these pages are best described as user-generated content, or UGC. And we watched previous office hours of yours, and we learned that UGC content and our content is treated the same, and that we should filter out low-quality content. And we're doing our best to do that. My question is, and hopefully it's not a silly one, we'd like to rank higher for our own target keywords, but we're worried that all this varied content and all this noise is holding us back. Is there something else we should be doing to kind of differentiate our content? We have our own blog and our own marketing pages, but then there's a ton more e-commerce pages.
Yeah, I think the cases where I've seen something like this in the past, the best approach tends to be to separate things out. So essentially, if you're taking your own content and it's ranking amongst a lot of user-generated content or content generated by other people that is very similar, then we would see that as one website. And then we would struggle to figure out like which part of this website is relevant for which queries. So the ideal situation there, at least in cases that I've looked at in the past, where like you're offering blogs to other people, for example. I don't know if that kind of matches the model that you have for your e-commerce site. But when you essentially offer individual websites that people can create and host on your platform, then it makes more sense to put that into something like a subdomain so that each user has their own subdomain, or maybe even make it so that it's easy for them to put it on their own domain. And for you to kind of take your kind of like infrastructure information and also put that on a separate site.
Got it.
So essentially something like, I don't know, your your provider as a separate website from all of the hosted content that you have. And using subdomains is sometimes an easy way to do that. Sometimes it makes more sense to separate that out even more. Kind of similar, I guess, to how Blogger does it, in that you go to blogger.com for the Blogger information, and the subdomains on blogspot.com are the individual user sites. I think that kind of model makes it a lot easier. That also helps to isolate things a little bit when individual providers post a lot of low-quality content, because then we can recognize, actually, this subdomain is low quality, not the website overall. Or sometimes we run into situations where someone includes malware or spam or something on their site. And if we see that all as a part of your whole site itself, then we'd say, well, actually, this whole site has a lot of spam or malware elements attached to it. We need to take action on that. And that would include your kind of the infrastructure content as well, or all of the other providers that you're hosting there, which don't have anything to do with that spammy content. So by isolating things a little bit, usually it makes it easier for us to understand these are individual elements, and we need to take each of these into account individually rather than as one combined element.
Got it. That makes sense. It's interesting you mentioned the malware, because it was actually a second part to my question, where in Search Console, we've been getting uncommon downloads as a warning. And what we've done with that is we've scanned our website. It's easy for us to destroy our infrastructure and recreate it. And then we submit a review. But it's been coming back once a month. We get a success message, but it comes back again. I guess it's really hard also to ask for a specific URL that's causing that issue. I don't know what we could do with that.
Yeah, I mean, usually the uncommon downloads comes from something where you're hosting something that is almost like unique per user. So that's kind of a general situation where, for example, you can sign up and you can download some software tool, and it generates a zip file or an executable specifically for that user. Then because those files are unique to each user, we can't scan those files. And that's why we flag them as uncommon downloads. And if you do the review request, then we do go off and scan those files that we found and double check that they're not actually malware. But that's kind of why, like, we don't have individual URLs that we can show you there. But if you do the review, we will double check, and we will let you know if there's anything that was actually problematic. And if these are files that individual users are uploading, then it's kind of tricky. And that's also one of those cases where isolating the individual users from each other, I think, makes a lot of sense, because then it's just one subdomain or one domain that is getting this warning, and they have to figure it out. And it's not something that you have to figure out for everyone.
Got it. And just to clarify the subdomain, do you mean a subdomain on our domain? Because wouldn't that still fall under our property?
Yeah, I think a subdomain on your domain is kind of the minimal step I would take.
Okay.
I would even kind of move your primary content to a different domain.
Okay.
Just so that it's like the infrastructure domain and the different hosted websites are separate.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you, John. Super helpful.
Sure. OK, time-wise, I think we're at time. But like I mentioned, I still have more time for the people that still have raised hands. Thank you all for all of your questions so far. It's been really interesting, lots of good questions. And I hope you found this useful. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to join in on one of the future office hours. I do these English ones about once a week, alternating between early and late times to try to get more time zones in. But you can also drop your questions in the YouTube community section as well. All right. And with that, I will pause the recording and